Pavlishchev was my benefactor and my father's friend. Ah, what made you write such an untruth about my father in your article, Mr. Keller? There was no embezzlement of company funds, nor any offending of subordinates. I'm positively sure of that. And how could you raise your hand to write such slander? And what you wrote about Pavlishchev is absolutely unbearable. You call that noblest of men lascivious and frivolous, so boldly, so positively, as if you were indeed telling the truth, and yet he was the most chaste man in the world. He was even a remarkable scholar. He corresponded with many respected men of science and contributed a great deal of money to science. As for his heart, his good deeds, oh, of course, you have correctly written that I was almost an idiot at that time and could understand nothing, though I did speak Russian and could understand it, but I can well appreciate all that I now remember. Excuse me, shrieked Hippolyte, but isn't this a bit too sentimental? We're not children. You wanted to get straight to business. It's past 9, remember that. If you please, gentlemen, the prince agreed at once. After my initial distrust, I decided that I might be mistaken and that Pavlishchev might actually have a son. But I was terribly struck that this son should so easily, that is, I mean to say, so publicly reveal the secret of his birth and, above all, disgrace his mother. Because Chebarov had already frightened me with publicity then. How stupid! Lebedev's nephew cried. You have no right, you have no right! Cried Burdovsky. A son isn't answerable for his father's depraved conduct, and the mother is not to blame, Hippolyte shrieked vehemently. The sooner, it seems, she should be spared, the prince said timidly. You're not only naive, prince, but maybe even more far gone, Lebedev's nephew grinned spitefully. And what right did you have? Hippolyte shrieked in a most unnatural voice. None, none at all. The prince hastily interrupted. You're right about that, I admit, but it was involuntary, and I said to myself at once just then that my personal feelings shouldn't have any influence on the affair, because if I acknowledge it as my duty to satisfy Mr. Burdovsky's demands in the name of my feelings for Pavlishchev, then I must satisfy them in any case, that is, regardless of whether or not I respect Mr. Burdovsky. I began to speak of it, gentlemen, only because it did seem unnatural to me that a son should reveal his mother's secret so publicly. In short, that was mainly why I was convinced that Chebarov must be a blackguard and must have prompted Mr. Burdovsky, by deceit, to such crookedness. But this is insupportable, came from the visitors' side, some of whom even jumped up from their seats. Gentlemen, that is why I decided that the unfortunate Mr. Burdovsky must be a simple, defenseless man, a man easily swayed by crooks, and thus I had all the more reason to help him as Pavlishchev's son, first, by opposing Mr. Chebarov, second, by my devotion and friendship, in order to guide him, and, third, by arranging to pay him 10,000 rubles, which, as I calculate, is all that Pavlishchev could have spent on me in cash. What? Only 10,000? Cried Hippolyte. Well, Prince, you're not very strong in arithmetic, or else you're very strong, though you pretend to be a simpleton. Lebedev's nephew cried out. I don't agree to 10,000, said Burdovsky. Antip? Agree. The boxer, leaning over the back of Hippolyte's chair, said in a quick and distinct whisper. Agree, and then later we'll see. Listen here, Mr. Mishkin, shrieked Hippolyte, understand that we're not fools, not vulgar fools, as your guests all probably think we are, and these ladies, who are smirking at us with such indignation, and especially this high society gentleman, he pointed to Yevgeny Pavlovitch, whom I naturally do not have the honor of knowing, but of whom I seem to have heard a thing or two. Excuse me, gentlemen, but again you haven't understood me. The prince addressed them in agitation. First of all, Mr. Keller, in your article you give an extremely inexact notion of my fortune. I didn't get any millions, I have only an eighth or a tenth part of what you suppose. Second, no one ever spent any tens of thousands on me in Switzerland. Schneider was paid 600 rubles a year, and that only for the first 3 years, and Pavlishchev never went to Paris for pretty governesses. That again is slander. I think far less than 10,000 was spent on me in all, but I decided on 10,000 and, you must agree, in repaying a debt, I simply couldn't offer Mr. Burdovsky more, even if I was terribly fond of him. I couldn't do it simply from a feeling of delicacy, precisely because I was paying him back a debt and not sending him charity. I don't see how you can fail to understand that, gentlemen. But I wanted to make up for it all later by my friendship, my active participation in the fate of the unfortunate Mr. Burdovsky, who had obviously been deceived, because without deceit he himself could not have agreed to such baseness as, for instance, today's public statement about his mother in Mr. Keller's article. But why, finally, are you again getting so beside yourselves, gentlemen? We finally won't understand each other at all. Because it turned out my way. I'm now convinced by my own eyes that my guess was correct, the excited prince went on persuading, trying to calm the agitation and not noticing that he was only increasing it. How? Convinced of what? They accosted him almost ferociously. But, good heavens, first of all, I myself have had time to take a very good look at Mr. Burdovsky, and I can now see for myself how he is. He's an innocent man, but whom everybody is deceiving. A defenseless man, and therefore I must spare him. And, second, Gavrila Ardalionovitch, whom I entrusted with this affair and from whom I had not heard any news for a long time, because I was on the road and then sick for 3 days in Petersburg, now suddenly, just an hour ago, at our first meeting, informs me that he has gotten to the bottom of Chebarov's intentions, that he has proofs, and that Chebarov is precisely what I supposed him to be. I know, gentlemen, that many people consider me an idiot, and Chebarov, going by my reputation for giving money away easily, thought it would be very easy to deceive me, counting precisely on my feelings for Pavlychev. But the main thing is, no, hear me out, gentlemen, hear me out. The main thing is that now it suddenly turns out that Mr. Burdovsky isn't Pavlychev's son at all. Gavrila Ardalionovitch just told me so, and he assures me that he has obtained positive proofs. Well, how does that strike you? It's impossible to believe it, after all that's gone on already. Positive proofs, you hear. I still don't believe it, I don't believe it myself, I assure you, I'm still doubtful, because Gavrila Ardalionovich hasn't had time yet to tell me all the details, but that Chebarov is a blackguard there is not longer any doubt. He has duped the unfortunate Mr. Burdovsky and all of you, gentlemen, who came nobly to support your friend, for he obviously needs support, I do understand that, he has duped you all, and involved you in a crooked affair, because it's all essentially knavery and crookedness. What's crooked about it? How is he not Pavlishchev's son? How is it possible? Exclamations rang out. Burdovsky's whole company was in inexpressible confusion. But naturally it's crooked. You see, if Mr. Burdovsky now turns out not to be Pavlishchev's son, then in that case Mr. Burdovsky's demand turns out to be downright crooked, that is, of course, if he knew the truth, but the thing is that he was deceived, that's why I insist that he be vindicated, that's why I say that he deserves to be pitied in his simplicity, and cannot be left without support, otherwise he, too, will come out as a crook in this affair. And I myself am convinced that he doesn't understand a thing. I, too, was in such a condition before I left for Switzerland. Hey you, babbled incoherent words, you want to express yourself and can't I understand it, I can sympathize very much, because I'm almost like that myself, I'm permitted to speak. And, finally, I still, despite the fact that Pavlishchev's son is no more and it all turns out to be a mystification, I still haven't changed my decision and am ready to hand over the 10,000 in memory of Pavlishchev. I wanted to use this 10,000 to start a school in memory of Pavlishchev even before Mr. Burdovsky appeared, but now it won't make any difference whether it's a school or Mr. Burdovsky, because if Mr. Burdovsky is not Pavlishchev's son, he's almost like Pavlishchev's son, because he has been so wickedly deceived, he sincerely considered himself the son of Pavlishchev. Now listen to Gavrila Ardalionovich, gentlemen, let's be done with it, don't be angry, don't worry, sit down. Gavrila Ardalionovich will explain it all now, and, I confess, I'm extremely anxious to learn all the details myself. He says he even went to Pskov to see your mother, Mr. Burdovsky, who didn't die at all, as you were forced to write in the article. Sit down, gentlemen, sit down. The prince sat down and managed to get the Burdovsky company, who had all jumped up from their places, to sit down again.